Hi, everybody, and welcome. Terribly sorry for the delay. I hope everyone can hear me and that we have fixed these technical difficulties. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to give a short rundown of the plan for today, and then we see how it turns out. Essentially, we're going to start with a quick 10-15 minute presentation of the Dear Greenpeace campaign. Then we're going to have a quick presentation about the legal aspect of this campaign, and then we're going to have a panel discussion. So, and I'll invite the panelists up now. For those who don't know, I'm Ia Anstut, and I'm calling in from Sweden. And with me, we have Julia calling in from Poland. We have Charlene calling in from the US, but from Jamaica. And then we have Princey calling in from South Africa. And that's us. So, we'll get started right away since we lost a bit of time to the technical difficulties. And I will start with the presentation on the Dear Greenpeace campaign. Okay, so Dear Greenpeace, it's a campaign by me and my team with the help of RePlanet, as I'm sure you're all already aware. So, who am I? Well, I'm Ia, and I got active in climate activism in general at the age of 13 after, well, mostly because of Greta Thunberg, but also because I had been caught aware about the problem of climate change from growing up in Kenya, where everyone was complaining about the lack of rain seasons all the time. And that's a very understandable and very terrifying complaint. And it was something that stuck with me. So I got active, and then I got disappointed because there weren't any solutions in the climate movement. And that led to me finding nuclear power, which is a solution, and it's a necessary one. And because I found nuclear power, I got active in the pro-nuclear movement. And that, to me, was a life-changing moment because there is, let's call it, peace there. There's pragmatism, there's hope in the pro-nuclear movement. There's a belief that we can truly solve climate change, which I find very lacking in other parts of the world. So that is why I'm active in it, and that is why I'm doing this. So, to give a bit of background on the entire campaign in specific, we first have to talk about the EU taxonomy, which you'll get a more legal, in-depth description of it later when Julia goes up to talk about the legal aspects, but I'll start with a very quick one. The EU taxonomy is the document that regulates where green financing in the EU goes. It means that all the loans that are given out to non-EU countries from the EU are regulated by this. It means that all the internal financing within the EU is regulated by this. It means that the research within the EU is regulated by this, and so on and so forth. So it's really important for the potential to complete a sustainable transition for the European Union and for the rest of the world. And nuclear power was recently added to this report. But then something happened. Greenpeace sued the European Union for the inclusion of nuclear power in the taxonomy. And that's where this campaign comes in. We are trying to preserve nuclear power in the EU taxonomy by joining the court case as an interested party. And all of these terms will be explained in detail later. But what's important to note is that we are trying to call on Greenpeace to drop their opposition to nuclear power. And by doing that, we have launched a petition urging them to do so, which I hope you all signed. If you haven't, go sign it. It's on RePlanet's website. then we're also joining the court case, as I've just mentioned. And these are two-folded aspects. The first one, to hopefully once and for all show Greenpeace that the environmental movement is pro-nuclear, and that they should be too, and essentially urge the rest of Greenpeace to follow in the footsteps of Greenpeace Finland. And the second part, to actually ensure that we don't lose nuclear power in the EU, because it's such a vital tool for the sustainable transition. So I'm doing this with the help of RePlanet, because private individuals cannot enter an EU court case. And RePlanet, as it says here, is a new kind of environmental movement with a radical science-backed plan to repair the damage to our precious starship, Earth. We can liberate nature and elevate humanity. Essentially, the belief is that with the help of technology and with the help of political movements, we can essentially save our human species, because that's really what this is about. Climate change is not a threat to planet Earth, it is a threat to humanity. And we need to solve that threat. And we can do so by means of technology. And so RePlanet is helping me in this course. So, how's it going? That's what we're all interested to know about. Well, we have raised nearly 16,000 euros so far, and we've gotten over 8,500 signatures. So I would say it's going quite well, but it can go better. So if you haven't signed the petition, sign it. And please do share us and retweet us or re-X us or whatever it's called nowadays. And hopefully we'll get even more signatures. And thank you all for being here, for being active, and for supporting this campaign. And I will hand over to Yulia.
Thank you, Iya. Thank you for this presentation. You gave us a short background on who we are and why do we take the legal action. And I would like to tell you a little bit more about the legal part of the process. So, starting at the beginning, in September 2022, Greenpeace requested the European Union Commission not to include gas and nuclear activities in the EU taxonomy. On 8th February 2023, the European Union Commission declined the Greenpeace's request. And after that, on 18th April of 2023, Greenpeace and other organizations started court proceeding against the Commission's decision. On 3rd July of 2023, the court officially published the court proceeding against the European Union Commission. Declining the requests by Greenpeace is a decision made by the European Union Commission. And RePlanet have intervened in this procedure, and we have submitted papers on 22nd of August of 2023, so a few days ago. And what is an intervener and intervention? An intervention is not an independent legal action, so we must support in whole or in part the form of order by one of the parties. One of the parties is Greenpeace and the other is European Commission. Although we may not raise another form of order, we may use different arguments to support the form of order. In this case, principally, why nuclear activities are rightly included in the European Union taxonomy. As an intervener, we chose a side in this case, of course, the side of European Union in defense of nuclear. Greenpeace and the Commission will be requested to give their views on the intervention request, after which the General Court will decide whether to admit us. If we are admitted, we will receive the complete case file and we will be allowed to give our arguments and participate in the remainder of the procedure, including possible hearings. And actually, why the Greenpeace argues? What are the Greenpeace argues? First one, and it's what they actually said, they say that the Commission decision dated 6th February 2023 does not meet the technical screening criteria to be based on conclusive scientific evidence and the predictionary principle. Second one, from their side, is that the context decision does not comply with the requirement for best performance in the sector. Third, the contested decision does not comply with the transition to a climate neutral economy. Fourth, the contested decision does not contribute substantially to the climate change adaptation. And the fifth one, the contested decision does not satisfy the do not significant harm requirement. This is what they have on their side. We actually are debunking this. And obviously, we are not in the court alone, just as youth. We are working as a whole organization, RePlanet International and RePlanet Netherlands. These are two organizations that submitted papers to European Court. Okay, so long story short, I'm sorry, I forgot about one important part, the sixth argument from the Greenpeace side, that the contested decision is an infringement of the requirement for minimum safeguards for nuclear activities. So they have 6 arguments, and we are, as I said previously, debunking them and showing that nuclear is something that we need in European taxonomy. We are not doing this alone as youth. We are doing this with RePlanet International and RePlanet Netherlands. Yes, and that's the long story short about the situation that we are in right now, about the lawsuit, and we will be updating you when we know something more.
All right. So that's the basics of what's going on. And we'll now be moving on to a quick, doesn't necessarily have to be quick, but let's call it a panel discussion with everyone here. And I'll be starting by asking you all to introduce yourselves, give a bit of background, and explain why this campaign and nuclear power more generally matters to you. Julia, since you just spoke, why don't you continue speaking?
Thank you, Iya. Okay, so as you know, I'm Julia, and I'm from Poland. But you may not know that I'm a young biologist and environmentalist, and I work in Photo for Climate organization. It's a foundation in Poland, and and I work on biodiversity. I also started my scientific adventure with biodiversity, and that's also partly why I am invested in this process. I want to let you know, if you don't know that yet, that nuclear is actually really important for saving biodiversity. We are not using so much land, we can leave the rest for the nature. And that's also something that's really important to me. When I see like this power plants which can produce great amounts of energy without destroying the natural environment and with helping to elevate humanity, that's something amazing for me, and that's something that we should do, and we should support nuclear. That's my biological argument to that.
Perfect. Princey, you can go next.
Thank you so much, Iya, and good evening, good morning, and good day to everyone that's tuned in right now. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate you, Iya, for a wonderful job that you are doing. And thank you for inviting us today to share our insights with regards to the campaign and nuclear as a whole. My name is Princess Mtombeni. Many people call me Princey. I am based in South Africa, and I advocate for nuclear power on the African continent. I do that through my campaign called Africa for Nuclear, which basically is a campaign that aims to promote nuclear as a key contributor to achieving Africa's agenda for sustainable development. I believe in nuclear because I come from the only African country with a nuclear power plant. And upon joining the industry, I realized that there is justice that's not being done in terms of our energy sector on the African continent, because our continent has over 600 million people who are without access to power. And I realized that in order for this African continent to solve issues of energy poverty, we need to have a power that is sustainable, that is reliable, and that will be available for 24/7 so that people will be powered and Africa can be able to industrialize. Thank you.
All right, Charlene.
Thank you so much. I'd like to echo Princey's congratulations, Iya, and the RePlanet team for putting this together and all the efforts that you have made thus far. I am Dr. Charlene Smith. I am a nuclear engineer by training. I have my PhD and a master's in nuclear engineering. So I'm really the technical person here to talk about whatever questions you may have. I'm originally from St. Catherine, Jamaica, and I initially moved to the United States to help to contribute to the energy problem. And naturally, growing up on an island, I first turned to solar energy, and I was doing solar energy research for a very long time until I realized that, to have the impact, the broad scale impact that would, robustly improve the socioeconomic infrastructure of my native country, we were going to need something that was more reliable and could boost the social life as well as the economy of the country as well. And so that path led me to nuclear, but I still have love and respect for the renewables as well. And in fact, I think that moving forward, we're going to need to look at hybrid energy systems that really complement renewables and nuclear energy as the only clean energy sources that we have to choose from at this point. I think what we've seen broadly across the world is that we have fossil fuel energy sources that are, trying to complement renewable energy sources, which doesn't really quite work in a nicely balanced way, because here you're accounting for the reliability aspect as a fossil fuel energy source compared to renewables. But at the same time, you're producing carbon emissions and polluting the air and causing deaths significantly. And so there has to come a point where we ask what complement makes the most sense. From a practical standpoint, do I think that all countries everywhere should adopt nuclear energy? No, because it may not be appropriate for certain regions. For example, you have countries that have immense geothermal capability. For example, St. Kitts and Nevis, and they can sufficiently build up that geothermal capability and power their country that way. But for other countries who do not have that stable baseload renewable option, they really need to look at something that is cleaner, that is a better alternative to fossil fuels. And for me, that's nuclear energy, and combining that with the solar and wind and hydro capacity that we do have in Jamaica.
Okay, so I have a list of questions here that I'll be asking, but if anyone has any questions, they can ask them in the chats on YouTube or on Twitter, and we will answer them from there too. Okay, so with that being said, I figure we will leave the floor open to really whoever wants to take it and ask the question, what do you think is the most important aspect that nuclear power can play that other energy sources can't? You could do this from a local aspect or from a global aspect. Doesn't really matter. And I will leave it up to whoever feels like grabbing it.
I can go. Can I go first?
Go.
All right. As I mentioned earlier on, that Africa for Nuclear, we advocate for nuclear as one of the sources that will industrialize Africa. Basically, we think that nuclear energy will play a major role in ending energy poverty, and also can be a driving force to addressing triple threats, which are poverty, inequality, and unemployment here on the African continent. But what is most important is that the very important message is that we are spreading is that nuclear can play a role in addressing issues of climate change while supporting the continent's development. Because, in all honesty, I don't believe that we should be speaking about climate change and leaving the industrialization and development outside, especially for for a country, for a continent like Africa. When I talk about numbers on the African continent, Africa is home to 7%, 17% of the world's population, but it only accounts for just 4% of the global power, which is the lowest in the world. I mentioned earlier on that over 600 million people on the African continent do not have access to power. And the United Nations predict that Africa's population would have doubled by 2050 and amounting to approximately 2.5 billion people. And electricity demand is expected to triple by 2040. Now, let's talk about the per capita consumption of energy in sub-Saharan Africa, with the exclusion of South Africa. It's 180 kilowatt hour compared to 13,000 kilowatt hour in the US and 6,500 kilowatt hour in Europe. The world's average is about 3,500 kilowatt hour. And this means that Africa is 20 times less than the world's average. So we would need to increase our electricity generation 20 times the current capacity to at least be at the world's average. So access to clean modern energy in Africa, when more than 600 million people have no electricity, is critical to the success of global efforts to tackle energy poverty. Now, why nuclear energy source or nuclear energy source from an African perspective? As a continent, Africa is in desperate need of guaranteed, affordable, safe, reliable, and secured energy supply. And I believe that nuclear will enable African nations to decarbonize without compromising energy security. For example, if we take South Africa has 10 to 24 gigawatts of energy capacity that is expected to be decommissioned post 2030. And I believe that nuclear can replace this capacity in an environmentally friendly manner. And, just like in any developed nation, the energy security needs of Africa's future power system needs to fulfill 4 dimensions. The first one being affordability, second one being availability and reliability, the third one being socio-economic impact, and the last one being environment and climate impact. And nuclear energy as a source that is the source that meets all these and will help Africa prosper. Now, in closing, we are preparing for COP28 taking place in Egypt in November. And I do hope that African nations remain resilient in adopting baseload power technologies like nuclear and, gas, as well as the socio-economically sensible and responsible mix of wind and solar renewable energy. Because the consequences, ramifications, and repercussions of an energy transition without adjusting it would be of pandemic devastation, and in many developed and developing African countries, locking them into poverty for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Princey. Anyone want to jump in?
Yeah, I'd really just like to echo everything that Princey just said. I mean, these are things that are translatable benefits to other parts of the world, for example, the Caribbean. And I think for me, because small island developing nations, like many countries in the Caribbean, are on the front lines of climate change, there is an aspect of, yes, we want to be able to grow or socioeconomic infrastructure, but at the same time, we don't want to, completely be eviscerated by any natural disaster that comes along that is a result of the worsening climate conditions. And so I think nuclear energy here has a huge role to play. And when we talk about carbon emissions, like specifically in the Caribbean region, we're not contributing as much of the carbon emissions compared to other parts of the world. At the same time, we are using predominantly fossil fuel energy sources to drive our economies. And so there's an aspect there of cleaning up or energy intensive industries, but an even more enormous potential to grow the infrastructure in such a way that these countries, they can grow their GDP and improve quality of life. And the main reason why I got into energy in the first place and like went straight to solar was because my childhood growing up in Jamaica, it's, energy poverty is a real thing. It's particularly when we have these extreme weather events that pass through and we lose electricity for days and weeks at a time. It's not a fun experience. And I think that a lot of the other dominant countries, they don't get to, sit in wear our shoes to understand the immense impact that can have on the people living in those small island developing countries. And so I think developing nuclear energies, for example, in Jamaica, that makes sense for specific countries, right? If a mix of what you have to look at practically is what energy sources are optimal to mix with renewables based on the capacity or essentially the capacity of what the country can handle. And so in this case, we're talking about Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Dominican Republic, for example, that all, that show a potential for, deploying nuclear energy there. And so we're talking about not only boosting the socioeconomic infrastructure, we're talking about, alleviating a huge burden that is the cost of electricity. And so the Caribbean countries, we don't use as much energy as much of the larger countries, but it turns out that we are paying 3 times more for the electricity that is more unreliable, that goes out and comes whenever the case may be, and is accompanied by very, very large electricity bills, which really doesn't make any sense. And when I did that calculation, it was about, in comparison to Ontario, Canada, for example, Jamaicans are paying more than 3 times the amount of electricity per kilowatt hour compared to Ontario, Canada. That's a massive difference for a developing country. And when you look at the percentage of that has to come from people's income, you're looking at 17% of your electricity bill coming from your income, versus if you live in a country that has a nice mix of renewables and nuclear energy where the electricity is cheaper, your electricity bill is only 4% of your income. And so that's an extremely huge burden on small island nations and people's way of life that are living in these countries. And so I think nuclear energy, for where it's appropriate, it solves many challenges across the board. So if you're talking about building a nuclear power plant in different countries in the Caribbean, we are introducing jobs, we are boosting the economy, we are introducing new industries. For example, Jamaica is well known for producing and exporting bauxite. That's how we get money into the country, besides predominantly tourism. We could start looking into being able to desalinate water, because we are surrounded by water. If we have a nuclear reactor that could provide energy for us to desalinate water, we could export that water, that fresh water, and then bring money into the country. We could use energy to produce hydrogen, export it, and add to the resources that we have to offer And that will help build the country. So that money that would be coming into the country, building the economy, can go towards building schools, building hospitals, and building other entities that are, very crucial for continued development. And so there is a lot of opportunity there, but I think that for countries, for example, newcomer countries that are interested in exploring nuclear energy, an assessment ultimately needs to be done to say, let's talk about the complements of nuclear energy. Is nuclear energy a right fit for you? Just like how we know that we can't completely use solar panels only and say that we're going to decarbonize and use solar energy as our only source of energy. It really doesn't make sense to do that 100%. So we have things like wind that helps with the reliability issue. But even when you combine solar and wind, there's still a lot more room to cover as it regards to picking up from those downfalls. And so if you have geothermal, excellent, that works. If you have hydro capability, sure. Your other option is nuclear energy. And I think these countries or these areas really need to take a serious look at nuclear energy, because at the end of the day, it has to be a part of the solution. It may not be a solution for everyone, but it has to be a part of the solution, climate-wise, and all the other advantages that come along with it. It really just seems like a no-brainer there.
Yeah. Julia, do you want to comment on the same topic?
Yes, I would like to. And I, of course, 100% agree with you. And I would like to tell you a little bit more about the perspective of Poland, because I think that may be interesting, because we have the most dirty, actually, energetic sector in Europe. So we had this conversation and debate about how to decarbonize the system. And there is like a really huge wave of people that, especially like climate activists from this more like from more green movements, that are telling us that we should be 100% renewables, and it's impossible for Poland. And they are showing the Excel sheets where they are calculating that we have enough land to do that, and we have enough space to do that, and we can use degrowth, and we can, switch off the the system for the night or something like that. They are giving this kind of arguments, and actually, I think it's really important what you said, that we have to have electricity to run the hospitals, to run the prisons, even, because it's also important part, to give the energy to the people so they can be safe. And it's really important for developing countries, but also for developed countries to keep it. Of course, consume less, and I agree to that, but also to keep the safety for the citizens. And at the same time, we have to think about the environment and about the climate. So we have to find a solution that is safe for the climate, that is safe for the environment, and good for the people, and can elevate the society. And what is also really important, and you, Charlene, said it, and I think I would like to echo it actually, that there is not a one solution for everyone. We cannot say that everything is for this one thing is for everyone, and we should be the same in each aspect. Each country is different. Each country has different social problems. Each country has different people living inside of it. Each country has a different capacity of different energy sources and different energy systems. So we have to remember about that, and we have to get each side of the problem and try to, see pros and cons, and then calculate what's the best for this region. And also something that anti-nuclear movements are accusing us of is that we are against renewables, which is not true. Every one of us, actually, we are for the safe energy system. Safe for the climate, safe for the people, and safe for the nature, and not against renewables and for 100% nuclear. I would also like to show that, because not for everybody it's clear. And also this kind of approach that different solutions are for different countries. It's not the thing that journalists like to say about, because it's not, it's not something 0 or 1. It's something in between. But I think it's really important to think about different sides of the problem and to calculate the final solution for each region. And of course, not everywhere we need 100% nuclear, or even in some places we don't need nuclear, but we need it in other places to make it safe for the people, for the nature, and for the environment. So yeah, but the rest of that you already said, so I'm just echoing you, but I agree 100%.
Okay, I figure we'll get on to some questions from the audience. And I have the YouTube questions with me right now. And the first question is from Roger, who wants to know why nuclear power is safe. And I figured I'd leave that up to Charlene.
Thank you, Iya. I think the name was George. Sorry, you said?
Roger, and it's about
Roger.
nuclear power being safe, and specifically on the topics of Chernobyl and Fukushima.
Gotcha. Hi, Roger. That's an excellent question, because even when I transitioned over to at least investigating the potential of nuclear energy being the solution that I wanted to go towards, moving past solar energy, that was a big question that really came up. And I think when we talk about safety in energy in general, we need to address or approach that conversation on a balanced landscape. So for example, if we're going to talk about safety, we want to talk about contextualizing what safety really means in energy specifically, right? And so that's talking about nuclear energy safety, that's talking about fossil fuel safety, that's talking about renewable energy safety. These are conversations that safety is a conversation that extends broadly to all energy sources. And I think that, one of the ways that you can try to at least approach assessing the safety of energy sources across the board is by looking at the number of deaths that are associated per electricity that is produced, right? So for example, World in Data, we have data that looks at deaths from accidents and air pollution. And so from that aspect, looking across the board again, we know that coal, natural gas, oil, really high on the list as regards to deaths per terawatt hour of electricity that's generated. And if you look at the very bottom of that list, surprisingly, you'll see, if you're very new to nuclear energy or that topic, you'll see that right beside solar and wind, there is nuclear. And when you look at that data includes deaths from accidents like Fukushima and Chernobyl. So that's one really something that we need to encompass. I think there's a taboo around the safety of nuclear energy in general, because it is a very niche industry, right? And it's not one that is very well understood by the general public. And so what I can say there is that to talk about those accidents, right? And those are the 3 major accidents, right? If you take those accidents and then look at the number of accidents or deaths from other energy sources, the list will go on pages and pages and pages. But nevertheless, you could make the argument that, well, if there is a nuclear accident, it has a larger consequence. And that is true, right? So what we as nuclear engineers would do, what our job is then to design these plants and design these reactors in such a way that the safety systems are redundant on top of redundant on top of redundant on top of redundant, right? And to kind of address what's happened in the past with these major accidents, let's talk about Fukushima, for example. Fukushima is the Fukushima Daiichi plant. The accident started with an earthquake of magnitude, I think, 9 on the Richter scale, right? When that earthquake initiated, the reactor shut down automatically as designed. It's designed to do that, right? So all nuclear reactors, whether we're talking about floods, tsunamis, earthquakes, whatever the case may be, they are designed, the reactors themselves are designed to specifically shut down or to automatically shut down during that initiating event, right? So for the earthquake, at least, let's start there. The reactor shut down as it was supposed to. The problem now came when we had the tsunami, right? That swept over the area. And so what happens is that, so your reactor automatically shuts down, right? You're no longer actively producing energy by fission. But even though you're not actively producing energy by fission, you're still producing heat in that reactor because you have radioactive decay that is releasing heat in the reactor anyway, right? So even though it's shut down, it's still producing heat through radioactive decay. And so as a built-in part of the design, if you shut down a reactor, you know that you're still going to have radioactive decay that is producing heat. You have to have cooling systems that would continue to keep the reactor core cool, right? And so that's what was supposed to happen here. Earthquake happened, the reactor shut down, it's still producing heat because of radioactive decay. It activated the emergency cooling systems. The problem there was that the emergency cooling systems could not get activated because the tsunami had flooded that system because it was located underground. And so in that case, it wasn't a flaw of the reactor design itself. It was a flaw of the reactor, of the nuclear power plant, right? You don't want your backup cooling systems in the basement, especially if you're in a seismic area where you can initiate a tsunami. And so because those cooling systems were flooded, there was no way for those cooling systems to keep the reactor cool. And so what happened? It continued to produce heat, the reactor overheat, you had a fuel meltdown. And so when you had a lot of the heat being produced, the fuel itself was exposed to steam, and that interaction of zirconium, which is the cladding material in the fuel, and the steam created hydrogen, right? And that hydrogen kept building up, and we kept producing more hydrogen. And of course, if you're building up hydrogen, you're going to get to a point where you're going to increase the pressure so much that it's going to cause a hydrogen explosion. And that is exactly what happened step by step by step for Fukushima. Could those things have been prevented? Absolutely. One, in the case where the cooling systems should not have been in the basement. Simply, that's dry and cut. There were other reactors that were also in the vicinity of the epicenter of the earthquake and tsunami that didn't have damage, right? But when we look at the design of the plant itself for Fukushima Daiichi, that was a significant flaw that did not allow the safety systems to operate as it should have because of that design flaw. Now, I mean, you can also look at it and say that, yes, well, and I get this question a lot. You want to put a nuclear reactor in Jamaica on an island, it's so tiny. What happens when you have natural disasters? What other natural disasters have we heard of that's a major accident that caused a meltdown like Fukushima? We have to wait, right? Because we can't really list another type of Fukushima. Natural disasters, whether it's floods, hurricanes, storms, tsunamis, has been happening since the beginning of time, okay? And so there has been countless of these extreme weather events that have happened where these nuclear reactors have been located. And we still haven't heard of, say, a Turkey Point accident. In 1992, a Category 5 hurricane, Hurricane Andrew, I think, in 1992, directly hit Turkey Point power plant in southeast Florida. Direct hit. There was no damage to the nuclear safety systems. There was no damage to the systems that was able to produce energy for the reactor. We've never heard of it. Turkey Point, we've never heard of it. And so if you go back and look at the track record of nuclear power plants versus, I like to say, nuclear power plants or nuclear energy versus natural disasters, name the natural disaster. Anytime you will see that the nuclear power plants, they win 99% of the time. Fukushima is the outlier, right? And we know exactly why Fukushima occurred, and we know that it was preventable. Did that answer it? Because I could keep going. Does that answer the question?
I think that's a good enough answer. Thank you very much. Okay, and then we have a question from Jan Olsen that I think that Julia and I should answer. It's how do we plan to turn this concept into a mass movement that engages all age demographics, so you move the politicians on this subject quickly? Julia, do you want to start, and then I'll hop in?
Thank you, Ia. I think for now, we have to collect the signs. I think that's the thing that you can do in this minute. You can sign the petition. Afterwards, we will, with RePlanet, run the campaign until the decision of the European Court. So during the campaign, you can also get involved to that. I think we will open ourselves for the other countries from European Union, because for now we have 5 countries, but the list is still open. But maybe you can just engage in that way. Also, Ia, maybe you have some things to say to add to that.
I mean, yeah, I think that as it looks right now, we have managed to engage people of all ages, and I think our goal is to continue doing that, to really unite everyone, because what we really want to say is that we want a united environmental movement. We want a united green movement. We want to be on the same side as Greenpeace. We don't actually want to fight Greenpeace. We just feel like nuclear power is so important that we cannot let them destroy nuclear power without us saying against and fighting against it. And so we really do hope that we can manage to make this into a mass movement, and we think that nuclear power has all the required needs to become a mass movement, because it's got pragmatism, it's got optimism, it has hope for the future, and it has a clear plan forward, which I think is what a lot of people feel like they need to really engage with the climate movement, because there can be quite a lot of pessimism in it. So I think that's what's important to keep in mind.
If I may add something to that, sure. Also, the things are changing. You know, the Fridays for Future, at the beginning, they were absolutely against the nuclear power. Currently, especially, for example, in Poland. Right now in Poland, we have Fridays for Future movement, and they are for nuclear. Also, the Greens are changing their minds. So actually, we are seeing that, you know, we in Europe, we are dealing with energy crisis currently. We have war in Ukraine. We have massive problems, and people are seeing that we need stable energy source in the base of energy mix. So I think they are starting to see that it's really important to work beyond the borders, beyond the differences between us, and actually work together for the climate, against the climate change, to tackle the climate change, and to give the electricity to the people in terms of changing the energy system. So the things are changing. Actually, the movement starts to move. And it has started to create itself, and right now we are just the voice of this movement which has started.
Yeah, that sums it up quite good. Now we have a bunch of questions from a few different people on the topic of smaller nuclear reactors. Anyone feel comfortable jumping in on that? And I feel like the first thing we should say is that research is fun. Technology that we already have is great for solving the climate crisis. But if anyone wants to hop in with more details, they're more than welcome to.
Yeah, the small modular reactors really, they're a type of nuclear reactor, right? So they're essentially what you want to call the fun size version of the reactor. And small modular reactor really means it's small, smaller than the traditional nuclear reactor, up to 1/3 of its size. It's modular in the sense that it can be factory built anywhere and then shipped to a particular site, where your traditional reactors, it has to be constructed and built on the site where it's going to produce power. And then the reactor, small modular reactor, R really just says that it's producing energy using the fission process, which is the basic concept as well of the traditional reactors. I think there's a lot of opportunity for small modular reactors, and I just keep talking about small island developing nations, for these regions that are really on the front line of climate change, right? And it's immense opportunity for developing countries to boost their socioeconomic infrastructure, their educational infrastructure, by introducing a new field of study. And so the smaller designs, what are really nice about them is that they have passive safety systems. And you might be wondering what passive safety systems mean. It basically means that in the event of an incident, it automatically has safeguards that are triggered by themselves, and there's no need for operator intervention. And so when we talk about traditional nuclear reactors, we talk about their safety track records of, safety track record compared to all energy sources across the board. Nuclear is among the lowest, down there with solar and wind. The small modular reactor, so we know that traditional nuclear reactors are safe. The small modular reactors are saying that, we have come a long way since the 60s and the 70s, and we have made technological advancements in the current day and age to improve on the designs to make our designs more innovative and safer for the people and the environment. And so really the SMR is really a fun-sized version of your larger reactor. And what's nice about them is that you can use small modular reactors in what we call the hybrid energy systems, right? So you could have a plant where you have a hybrid of renewable energy sources and that small modular reactor, where the small modular reactor can kick in when the capacity of when the capacity factor of the renewable energy sources are low. It can, pick up the slack. And then when the capacity factor of the renewable energy sources are peak, we can ramp down the power. And what's nice about that is that you can ramp up or ramp down the power as you see fit. And so it presents a really nice, clean hybrid energy system that covers that spectrum of reliability. And I do think that there needs to be more educational efforts to talk, specifically about the technology and how these passive safety systems work and how they're different from the safety systems and your traditional nuclear power plants. These are all things that I think, should be discussed, because then it makes them less taboo. The more we know, the more the less we fear, or the more we understand, the less we fear what these technologies really have to offer.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just quickly going to answer Sleuthmate's question. Assuming Greenpeace does not withdraw and this matter goes to trial, can you estimate when this court case will be heard? From the lawyers, we have an estimation that we will know if this court case will at all be heard, because we still do not know if Greenpeace or we have been admitted to the court, by Christmas/end of year. So it is a while to go. And then they estimate that the court case will take upwards of 2 years. And I think that was their optimistic estimate. So it'll be a while. I'm gonna hop around a bit in the questions, and we have a question from Lorcan Smith. How can we improve representation of pro-nuclear environmentalists in the media? And I'd like Princey to hop on this, because I think it'd be fun to have a non-Western viewpoint in this, because I think this is a very Western question.
Sure, thank you. I think that that's a very important question, because for a very long time, the nuclear industry has focused on improving the safety part or aspect of technology, and they neglected the communication and PR staff. And that's the reason we find ourselves as the industry in this predicament where everybody's talking about us, but not us talking about ourselves. No one wants to listen to us. And I do believe that we lost it from the beginning when it comes to media issues and communication issues. So my take is that I've seen a couple of documentaries that talk about nuclear, like the nuclear energy now. I think that's the very best approach that we should be using as the industry. Let's make films. Let's even make fiction films. I spoke to someone yesterday from the US who was telling me about their fiction book that talks about nuclear, and I think that's one of the approaches that are relevant and should be used. So and also we have a media that is hostile towards the industry. I don't know why that is happening, but we sort of have a media that really does not like the industry. I don't know if it has to do with the issues of funding, or maybe as the industry, we don't invest resources in that space. Maybe we should think about that too, to say, how then do we maybe create our own influences and maybe organize roundtables with journalists where we educate them about nuclear. I recently visited Namibia to talk about radiation, and the organizers actually brought a group of journalists who not even a single one of them understood what I was talking about. And I found that sad, to say, where are the nuclear industry people in this country? How can we have so many journalists and not even one of them can understand the language? So we need to conduct those sessions more, where we invite journalists and start teaching them about this topic, so that they can be able to write about the topic. And I think lastly, it's also very important that we as the industry, we write more, because if you go on Google and just type clean energy sources, you'll probably find nuclear on page 5. It won't be there. So professionals, Charlene, we should be writing more articles, and we publish them so that they are accessible by just ordinary people who are also trying to get information. And the most important part is that we need to influence young people, or to create a culture of young people that are curious, that are not going to take what is written on the media or whatever that is on their television and stuff. So we need to create a culture among our societies of young people who are curious and would want to search for information and not just take the gospel truth that is out there. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, it's about education. I think that's the sentiment of most things. And let's see what other questions we have. Poland has plans to build its first nuclear power plant. How can we know this won't have the same fate as Sarnavik with Greenpeace and other organizations pressing against it? Julia, hop in.
Okay, so yes, we are investing in the first nuclear power plant in Poland, not the first to be invested in, because we also had the investment previously. But unfortunately, after Chernobyl accidents, Greenpeace and other movements start protesting against the building of nuclear power plant, and it stopped. The government decided to stop the whole process, and currently we have picked the destination, and we are after the environmental impact assessment. So and also after they started public debate and the consultation of this document. And right now the process is going on. The question was, how do we know that it won't be stopped? Actually, we can only have faith in that. In Poland, we have problem with the changes of the governments, but currently the most of the parties are pro-nuclear. Not each of them, but actually many of them are pro-nuclear, and many of them are changing their opinion on nuclear. So they are starting to be for it. And the destination is really good. It's by the sea. Also, the environmental impact assessment has been written really well. Currently, we have these consultations with scientists, with like the citizens. Unfortunately, we will have quite big land used for that, for the whole investment. But we are actually, Polish society is pro-nuclear in general. We have, most of us is pro-nuclear, and right now, when you are at the doctors, for example, and you hear the conversations that are going on in the queue, people are talking actually about nuclear and about the investment. Also, we have some plans for the SMRs, but as we already discussed, it's for the future more. Yeah, and hopefully we will have this nuclear power plant running, the big scale one, because we need that. We have a really dirty energetic system. We are one of the biggest polluters in Europe, and we can try to change coal to nuclear like 1-to-1. So that's the way that we should take, and the path that we should take, and of course also invest in renewables energy sources. We are talking a lot about offshore, we are talking about wind on land, and of course about the photovoltaics. So we are getting somewhere, but we need nuclear. So it's also really important for Polish citizens to support this investment, to show the support during the election, because we have elections soon, and also to show that we are not scared, because our government was doing the educational campaign, also something that we already discussed today, and that's also why people know what is nuclear, why we shouldn't be scared of it, and how it works, and yeah, everything around that. So actually, answering that question really shortly, actually, we don't know, but we can show the support, and we can show that we need that, because we need that. The scientists are sure of that, and we need to decarbonize quickly and safely, and we need to have this energetic safety.
That's a great point. I just want to add onto your point, Ulia, that when you hear a lot of the conversations about nuclear versus renewable, it doesn't really make any sense saying that if we decide to, build more nuclear, that's taking away investment from renewables. No, that's not what the goal is here. The goal is to displace fossil fuel energy sources, right? Not to be in a fighting fist match with renewable energy sources, because they are our clean energy partners. But to displace fossil fuel sources in such a way that we are conscious of not displacing an entire community, an entire region of jobs. And so in that sense, we should be really targeting transitioning coal sites, natural gas sites, oil plants to nuclear, right? So that we are not in direct competition with renewable energy. We don't need to be in direct competition with nuclear energy. We need to get rid of the problem, and really the only solution that can adequately and even, you know, beyond that, replace these fossil energy sources is nuclear. And so when we're talking about you know, looking at different energy mixes and trying to address the climate problem by deploying more nuclear, we should be specifically talking about deploying nuclear in these areas that primarily use fossil fuel energy sources, and do it in such a way that it maintains the jobs. You are transitioning a workforce. You are not taking away from a community that has its own local economy. And so we should be really talking about targeting those communities and making sure that they still have their jobs, they have clean air to breathe, they have clean energy, and they can look into expanding into other industries based on what the nuclear plant has to offer, whether we're talking about a hydrogen plant, a desalination plant, whatever the case may be. There are so many opportunities there, but the conversation needs to be a focus on displacing what we are trying to solve here, and that is the climate issue. Not to replace renewables or to steal money from renewables. We want to talk to the utility companies or that own these fossil fuel plants in such a way that we can, you know, create policies that incentivizes these people to transition their plants to nuclear, to eliminate the issue that is worsening our climate.
Thank you for that, and I totally agree. Also, something to just quickly, I will say that something to say about this part of the problem that you described. We had this conversation with coal power plant workers, and they told us that they are waiting for the day when the light at the end will be blue, when we will switch to the nuclear. So they are really open to that. And it's not like they are against, like the workers of the coal industry or the fossil fuel industry are against the nuclear or against it depends, but the workers, they are against the lack of possibilities to work. They are worried of that. So we have to also remember about that in the whole process of the transition to the green energy sources. But thank you for this point.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, as I see it, we have a last question from Dan that I will answer. If anyone has any questions, they're going to have to post them while I answer Dan's question, or we will leave without answering them. So, is it better to try and persuade Greenpeace, the organization, or the rich donors who fund them? I think it's more important to concentrate on Greenpeace, the organization, because Greenpeace, the organization, is also the movement behind Greenpeace. And those are the ones we really want to get at. We want to get at the people. We want the masses of the environmentalist movement to be supportive of nuclear. That is our goal here. We want a united environmental movement to be able to put united backing and realistic backing on realistic solutions to a very, very real crisis, climate crisis. Because right now, one of the main reasons why the environmental movement has so comparably little power in comparison to its size is the fact that they are not putting forward concrete, realistic solutions that nations of the world feel like they can follow. But with nuclear power, we can do that. We can put forward concrete, realistic solutions that people all over the world feel like, yeah, I can do that, and I can do that without drastically worsening my living standards. I can do that without suffering. And that's what we really have to do about. We have to transition the world to a sustainable place, not just for the planet, but for humanity. And I think that's a really good point to end on, if no one else has anything else to say. Then we'll end it there. We're saving the planet, not just for the planet, but for humanity. Have a good day, everyone.